Hello, everyone. So this lecture is about theories of second language acquisition, which is really kind of a huge topic that's kind of grouped together in our textbook and represents both historical and current theories of second language acquisition. The historical theories continue to have a lot of influence and are important to understand. And of course, our knowledge is always evolving. So why is there so much emphasis on theory and on kind of putting a framework to understanding this second language acquisition? So a lot of people want to know what happens inside learners' brains. What is really going on when people acquire a second language? People also want to understand, compared to other types of learning, is learning a language different or the same? So is there something special about language that means that it follows a different course or has a lot of different influences than learning, for example, math or a physical skill or any other type of information? And then a lot of why people want to create these theories, of course, is to see how should we teach language? What are the most informed or prepared ways to teach language? What are the best practices based on our theoretical understanding? So interestingly, in the second edition of the book that we're using for our course, the author has divided the theory chapter into two parts, which I think was probably wise because it's a little long, right? This is an intense chapter, and this is why we're kind of breaking it down into the parts with the theory presentations that your classmates are doing. So the way that the author has broken it down is into non-cognitive theories and cognitive theories. So cognitive theories being really a focus on what's happening inside the brain, which, as we know, is now informed by more sort of biological research or psychological research, as opposed to some of the other theories that we can explore. So let's start by looking at some of the non-cognitive theories. And the first ones are those behavioral theories. And probably a lot of people have studied this before in terms of Skinner and some of the habits that develop. So that's like the Pavlov's dog, right? Ringing a bell, and the dog has a reaction that the food will be given. So this is the idea that language learning is just a habit. So it's kind of conditioned, right? If someone who's learning a language imitates or repeats and receives reinforcement, positive reinforcement, and in some cases negative or neutral reinforcement, that they will continue to do it, that they will continue to make progress and learn that language. And I think one of the biggest problems with that was that everybody says is there's no way to account for novel utterances. So novel utterance means the thing that no one has ever said before. So if I can say, like, I want milk, okay, that's probably something that someone has said before and that can be reinforced with milk. But if I say, the lotion on my desk is next to the scissors and the hand sanitizer, that could be something that no one has said before. So how does this theory account for my ability to say something that no one else has ever said before? So based on this behavioral theory, some people also developed an idea of contrastive analysis as a theory, which would say that the habits of the first language transfer to the second language. So contrastive analysis would analyze like the differences and similarities between two languages and suggest that if the languages are closer together, that's going to be easier for the learner to acquire. But if they're more substantially different, it's going to be harder for the learner to acquire. And that basically all the learning that a person does, or all the acquisition that a person does, is based on their ability to move those habits over to a new language. Okay? So the next general area that we're looking at is error analysis, and along with interlanguage. So error analysis is a system of analyzing the mistakes that people make when they're learning a language. So you could see in the textbook kind of a list of different errors that someone had, I believe, in their writing, or it can also be done for speaking. And then another column that analyzes where are those mistakes coming from. Are they coming from the first language influence? Are they coming from just a developmental influence, or where are they coming from? And that this was helpful for learning a language. And interlanguage is a very important concept in second language acquisition overall. So interlanguage represents an individual's internal system or understanding of the language as it develops. So it kind of holds that people who are learning a language have something in their mind that is governing their use of that language and the rules and the language that they're able to produce, that even if it's not correct, is still systematic and follows a system inside their own mind. So this is something that we'll revisit later in the semester because it's a very important topic, where we also study something called fossilization, where sort of a pattern that's incorrect becomes part of the interlanguage and gets kind of like stuck or fossilized in there, and it's harder to get it out because it's really become part of that learner's mental system of the language. So universal grammar, very important, an influential theory by Noam Chomsky, very well-respected professor, and it really holds that it suggests that there is a mental representation of language that everyone is born with, and some people even refer to it as a little black box, the language acquisition device inside the brain that enables people to make decisions about language, that creates parameters in which certain features of a language are allowed or not allowed. So the big question with universal grammar and its application to second language learning is illustrated in this diagram of how much access the L2 has to universal grammar. So universal grammar was originally developed as a way to describe how people learn their first language, and the idea that there's this black box, this separate way that people learn a language that's sort of born into them and sets some sort of parameters for their language. But how much can people actually access that when they're when they're also learning their second language? So some people think they can access it directly. Some people think they access it indirectly through the L1, and some people think there's no access, which would mean that a second language is learned with other mental faculties, like outside of that language acquisition device. Okay, Krashen is one of the major theorists of second language acquisition, and as you probably read, even though he's very popular, very influential, some of his research or theory was just really conjecture and didn't necessarily, couldn't always be proven when people did studies about it. So some of I listed his 5 hypotheses. One is that there's a difference between learning and acquisition. So learning would be in a formal, like a school setting, and acquisition would just be kind of catching a language. With that view of learning versus acquisition, that learning serves as a monitor or editor. So if somebody has acquired language, is acquiring language, they use their learning, like their explicit knowledge, for example, of a grammar rule, to monitor or edit their things that they just picked up. The natural order hypothesis is that learners acquire certain features of a language in a natural order, in the same order. Comprehensible input, very, very, very famous, very influential part of the theory, that input must be comprehensible in order to push students to learn. So I is the student's current level plus 1, whatever that means. Nobody really exactly knows what the plus 1 is, but that the input needs to be just a little harder than the learner's current level in order to push them forward. And finally, the affective filter, which as a theory, I think is something we'll explore a lot more, but that focuses on the idea that things like anxiety about language or motivation to learn a language have an influence on someone's ability to learn. Okay, going a little bit out of order for your book because of how we've reorganized, the last non-cognitive theory would be sociocultural theory. So a lot of these theories that we've studied up to this point happen almost in a vacuum, without interaction between or among people. So the sociocultural theory is something that many educators, as many of you are, have studied in terms of other types of learning by Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development, that learners can reach a new level with scaffolding from an expert, from a teacher, and by interacting with others. And that's how students are able to learners are able to sort of acquire more through that interaction and support from a teacher. So looking a little more at some of the cognitive theories, information processing is something that, we could kind of consider like bandwidth, mental bandwidth. Is something that people have studied a lot more recently in terms of overall learning. So this theory posits that second language acquisition is affected by processing limitations that affect other parts of the brain. And it also emphasizes the idea that some types of learning are controlled or structured and some are automatic. Automatic would be more like muscle memory, right? And that would also apply to language learning. So the cognitive theories have led to many related hypotheses, such as the interaction hypothesis, which suggests that when people interact with another speaker of the language, that input becomes more comprehensible to the learner because of the modifications that the other person makes. Okay? There's also the comprehensible output hypothesis, which states that when a learner is forced or pushed to produce the language, to speak, it pushes them to create more accurate production, to learn more, to produce better grammar, perhaps better pronunciation, and other features like that. We also have the noticing hypothesis. So, this suggests there's a difference between input and intake. So there's a lot of input, which is like every part of the language that's kind of coming into your brain, but intake is what you actually notice and pay attention to. So maybe the idea that the input can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming. Input processing by Professor Bill Van Patten, he was my professor at UIC, suggests that certain parts of the input, certain features of the input make it easier for learners to notice. So it's a very interesting theory too. And finally, we have a few more cognitive approaches like emergentism, where language emerges or comes out of the brain based on the frequency of input. Connectionism, which focuses a lot on neural networks. I think this is, this sort of focus on neural development and neurons is more and more important in all types of learning, as well as cognitive linguistics. And then finally, what is the right theory? So I always feel like this theory is the one that admits that there might not be just one of these theories that provides a comprehensive and, universal explanation for how someone learns another language. So that's why dynamic systems theory or complexity theory has been developed that really recognizes the complexity of the system as well as multiple factors and results that contribute to second language acquisition. So this is a theory that's used to describe many complex systems, but applying it to second language acquisition as a complex system is a little bit newer. So this week you'll have the opportunity to both, explore your own, explore a theory that you select in a lot greater depth, and also, learn from others in the class in greater depth about some of these theories too. So I hope that proves fruitful for you, and please let me know any questions.